What's up? Just picked this up. Not super sure what it does. Trying to figure it out. Shall we? Maybe you have heard of Meshtastic, or perhaps MeshCore, or just LoRa, L-O-R-A. Maybe you are trying to find a reliable infrastructure that you can control that doesn't rely on cellular networks or the internet for communications for your family, friends, and loved ones and community. Perhaps you're an amateur radio operator and you're looking for reliable emergency communications that don't require everyone else to be licensed. Maybe you want to be able to send text-based messages in an area that has no infrastructure. Maybe you're just a radio nerd like me and you heard about some other new radio nerd thing and you wanted to explore it. Well, whichever of these it might be, let's figure it out. I'm Andy, Kilo 5 Papa Oscar, and welcome to Airwaves Amateur Radio. I just picked this up. It's about the size of a credit card, quite a bit smaller than even my iPhone. To be fair, I'm not really sure what it does yet. I've been digging into this to try to figure it out myself. Let's go on a little journey, shall we? We'll start with LoRa, L-O-R-A. So what is that? Well, it's really, they say, LoRa stands for long range, which is interesting because though there is some long range potential, almost all of the communications occurring in Meshtastic or MeshCore are, relatively speaking, pretty short range. Hundreds of meters to maybe a couple of miles. So how do they work? Well, they work by what's called a mesh network. A mesh network requires multiple devices placed in a reasonably close proximity of each other with, for the most part, a line of sight of each other. When you have enough devices in an area, they blanket the area in radio reception or radio transmission coverage, or both, and allow you to communicate using that infrastructure you've placed or your community's placed, your friends and family have placed. So LoRa isn't just about communications. It can also be Internet of Things and any number of different things. But you've probably came here because you're interested in specifically the communications elements of either Meshtastic or MeshCore. That's why I'm on this journey as well. So, in the United States, this operates on 915 megahertz. In the EU, it's 868 megahertz, so a bit of a different frequency, although pretty close. And for the most part, most of the antennas and devices you'll see out there for MeshCore or Meshtastic operate on either of these things and work just fine regardless of where you're at. Maybe you're coming at this from the perspective of an amateur radio operator, and you might be saying to yourself, 915 megahertz. Don't I have access to that already? You do. Handy dandy band chart here. 902 megahertz, the 33 centimeter band. Okay, cool. Well, that gives me a lot of options. Not so fast. You see, although as amateur radio operators, we have a lot of privileges, including the entire band of that frequency, and we, at least in the United States, have a high power capacity for that band. However, if you're trying to build a communication protocol that involves both amateur radio operators and unlicensed operators, you can't use this like an amateur radio operator. Let's think about that a little deeper here. In the United States, at least, the FCC gives access to long-range or LoRa radio transmissions to unlicensed individuals under the FCC Part 15 regulations. Part 15 specifies that the unlicensed low-power operation that this uses has a maximum power of 1 watt ERP, 1 watt effective radiated power. As an amateur radio operator, if you are one, Part 97 that dictates amateur radio says that we as amateur radio operators can transmit on this band up to 1500 watts PEP. That's peak envelope power. That's probably a lot more in almost every situation. You see, 1 watt ERP, the ERP measurement, takes into account the entire process of that transmission, the entire system. It's the antenna, the gain of the antenna, the feed line, any feed line losses, and the transmitter itself. You could transmit something that was a fraction of a watt, have a very low loss feed line, have some gain on the on the antenna side rather, and end up way more than 1 watt effective radiated power. So if under the Part 15 rules, you have to consider that whole thing to make sure that your system isn't transmitting over 1 watt of effective radiated power. You're probably not going to be using like a Yagi antenna or something like that for this, because you might be adding too much gain. Also, it might be directional in a way you don't want. Kind of just depends. Now, as an amateur radio operator, if we were only communicating with amateur radio operators in this with our intention, then we could use much more power. Peak envelope power looks at the power at the transmitter itself. It doesn't concern itself with feed line losses or antenna gain. So let's say we transmitted 1500 watts from a 900 megahertz amplifier, 1500 watts peak envelope power, peak again, not average in this situation. We went into a low loss feed line and a high gain, maybe stacked Yagi 900 megahertz array. We could easily be transmitting multiple kilowatts of effective radiated power. Hey, that could be kind of cool. But it won't work for Meshtastic or MeshCore, because those have to operate under Part 15 rules in order to be used by others. You see, as amateur radio operators, we can't be retransmitting the transmissions of the unlicensed operators at our power levels. That would be in violation of Part 15 or Part 97, probably both. Further, both Meshtastic and MeshCore have some encrypted elements, and as amateur radio operators, we cannot transmit encrypted signals. You might have also heard about LoRaWAN, LoRaWAN. That's a protocol built on the LoRa concept. It's worth noting that neither Meshtastic nor MeshCore uses LoRaWAN. So we'll kind of set that aside for now because it's really not relevant to this conversation. Let's look a bit deeper into what and why someone might choose Meshtastic over MeshCore, because I've been going through this very question myself over the past few days. Got a handy dandy chart here. My friend Claude made for me. He's not really my friend, although sometimes he likes to act like it. Likes to act as if it is a sentient individual, but at any rate, Claude did a good job with this chart. I asked Claude, an Anthropic product, an AI product, to compare the current version of Meshtastic to the current version of MeshCore with a comparison of the most current stable releases. It built this little kind of pro and con chart, or comparison chart, a comparative analysis. So the very first one seems to be the key differentiator. As best as I can tell, MeshCore was probably designed because of a need to address network congestion. It seems to be developed primarily by some UK-based individuals. In the UK, there have been pretty advanced Meshtastic development and infrastructure over the past couple of years. And one of the challenges of Meshtastic is if you have too many nodes, they can create network congestion. It's not really probably designed very effective to handle tons and tons of nodes in an area. If you look at the top here, the key differentiator here is that Meshtastic is going to flood the network or broadcast all these packets of communications out. When you have Meshtastic, everything, all the devices, all the nodes in a mesh network, they're all sending out stuff all the time. And when they hear packets, they're repeating them all the time. It has a couple of advantages and a couple of disadvantages. If you have an area that has low infrastructure, let's say you don't have many nodes of either of these things, you probably need that. You probably need all these client devices to be repeating these packets. Otherwise, the packets won't go anywhere. Sometimes in a low density node network, there may only be one node that can hear you. If that one node hears you and doesn't repeat your transmission, it ends there. And if that's not the node you're trying to reach, your transmission will fail. However, if you have tons of nodes and they're all trying to do that, you get collisions, breakdowns in the communication, slowness, etc. It seems that MeshCore was primarily designed to address that concern that can happen with Meshtastic in very dense networks. While all the client devices rebroadcast by default in Meshtastic and can do up to 7 hops, only as a core design principle, repeaters will repeat in MeshCore. So you have many client devices that are only listening. A couple of advantages here. They can use far less battery for the client devices. Much clearer repeater paths and hop paths that need to be made with less congestion risk. But if you don't have that infrastructure and it's not clearly established, MeshCore probably won't work very well. I think that's the key decision maker for most people as they're thinking about Meshtastic or MeshCore is what is the node density in your area, what already exists out there, and is there already a congestion risk? If not, right now you probably want to look at Meshtastic. If there is, you probably want to look at MeshCore and make sure the area is aligned around that with a sensible repeater infrastructure design. I'm saying and using the word infrastructure loosely here. I really just mean whatever nodes that are out there need to be thoughtfully placed. And that's probably going to be not some sort of broadly organized thing. It's probably going to be a bunch of folks like you and I that choose to put a repeater, choose to put a node in a given place. Let's go a bit deeper. In message delivery confirmation, Meshtastic has a ambiguous checkmark icon that does not guarantee receipt, whereas MeshCore has a definitive yes-no delivery confirmation. It's a pretty strong plus in the MeshCore side, in my opinion. I think about a situation where perhaps core communication infrastructure, the cellular network's down, the internet's down. Maybe I go into an area, I send a message out into Meshtastic, and I don't know if the person I'm trying to reach got it or not, but then I leave my coverage area and I can't send another message. I really want to have some confidence they received that. So that's a bit of a tough one for Meshtastic. Store and forward capability is limited in Meshtastic, but there's a built-in room server that acts as a dedicated bulletin board service in MeshCore. That's pretty cool too. Stores messages for offline users and delivers on reconnect and can be password protected. Network efficiency, again, we spoke about how Meshtastic can floods or broadcasts, and so that can present some challenges because there's so much traffic happening all the time. Or it could be its biggest asset. Just depends on where you're at and the density. Significantly lower for MeshCore. It says Meshtastic can feel slower with default settings due to the timing and the flood. MeshCore probably feels faster. A bit better on power usage for MeshCore than Meshtastic. When it comes to hardware, what I've found is that almost all of the devices seem to support both MeshCore and Meshtastic, because that's kind of cool. So that way you don't have to pick, oh, I'm gonna go the MeshCore way, or I'm gonna go the Meshtastic way, and lock yourself into a hardware. Almost all of the main hardware makers I'm seeing, or board producers I'm seeing, you can purchase it. Maybe it's primarily designed for one or the other, but if you don't like it or want to change, you can generally flash the firmware of the device and go from Meshtastic to MeshCore or back. That's pretty cool. I like the flexibility. And it doesn't force us to choose one or the other. You'll also note there's most of the devices, the boards, tend to be this NRF52 or ESP32. Apparently these both work pretty well, the ESP32 being a bit more affordable, the NRF52 being better at power management and generally considered the better product if you can find one. And they do seem to be prevalent. It's not a challenge to find one. Both of them use and can use phone apps for Android and iOS, although MeshCore's core client does have a one-time payment or introduces some sort of 10-second delay or wait. That's a little weird. It is worth noting when it comes to licensing that Meshtastic is fully open source, whereas MeshCore's core firmware is open source, but many of the client devices are not. That may be changing. We may be seeing some shifts there, but that's something to consider, especially if you're very keen on open source. And I am, especially in this sort of environment. Both of them have a variety of additional features like telemetry of the devices, battery details, GPS, etc. Scalability, Meshtastic struggles in very large or dense meshes due to the flood traffic, and MeshCore really probably better for scalability, with the repeaters only handling large dense with the repeater only routing handling large dense networks more gracefully with less congestion. That is, if I could say that. Both of them do have encryption, with Meshtastic having primarily encrypted direct messages and all of it being encrypted in MeshCore. So you can look at that, depending on how important that is to you for your communication needs. And again, why amateur radio is probably not going to be what you want to use here, and neither of these are really going to be used on the amateur radio service without some specific modifications. Of note, there does seem to be some people doing forks of various things like LoRa APRS and like ham mesh and a variety of different things that are designed for like amateur radio operators trying to do something similar, addressing power and encryption and various things. But again, you're limiting then who you can connect with to only amateur radio operators. Might be okay for you, but it might not be what you're looking for. And in this particular case, I have lots of ways to connect with amateur radio operators, which is awesome. I'm more interested in this because of its ability to connect with everyone else. Power efficiency, spoke about that a bit earlier. MeshCore generally going to be more efficient because the repeater devices are going to be the ones consuming most of the power. Most of the client devices are not going to be repeating, so they don't use as much power. And I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but there is a recent change to MeshCore where they are offering some limited client repeat capabilities that can be, I guess, turned on or off, which might change much of the dynamic of many of the things we've spoken about here. You see an example here on the Meshtastic site of what these mesh sort of system works like, with client devices and repeater devices. But in, again, Meshtastic, all of these would be able to and would be repeating. So they're all going to be blasting out packets or flooding with packets. It shows an example here of some telemetry data on one of the devices. MeshCore's website's a little less transparent about what's going on. You see here an example of a phone app using MeshCore. Both of them seem to have something very similar with onboard phone applications. That's generally how you're going to, as a user interface. Generally, you'll have a phone. The phone will be what you'll message on. You'll message to oftentimes a companion device. That companion device will then connect with an intermediate device or a repeater, and that's how the network path will work. But it's worth noting, when you're doing that, you're not using the cellular network. You're generally using something like Bluetooth from your phone to your companion device. The companion device is using, in the US, 915 megahertz radio to send out to the mesh network, and then it propagates depending on the number of hops you've configured, the system, etc. So, looks like you're sending a text message, not using the cell phone, not using the cellular network, though. Oh, yeah. Well, hey, let's check this thing out. This device is the Seed Studio T1000E SenseCAP tracker. SenseCAP card tracker T1000E. It says for Meshtastic, but this can be flashed for MeshCore as well. It sounds like it's part of the Skynet system, T1000, but let's hope that's not what's happening here. Let's see what we've got. Pretty simple packaging, pretty simple device. It's quite attractive. Little semi or primarily transparent case. I don't really see where the antenna specifically is, unless this dot is the antenna, but maybe this is the antenna along this. There's a little metal. Obviously, a 900 megahertz antenna does not have to be small. That's a very small little battery in there, or generally referred to as a companion device. So generally, this is going to be what you're going to connect your phone to, I believe, via Bluetooth, and then this will reach out for other devices on the mesh network. This one has a little hole, so you can put like a little tag through it, hang it on your backpack or whatever, hang it in your truck, whatever it may be. It's pretty cool looking, pretty attractive. Has a little magnetic charger thing to it. Decent enough. Now, one thing this is like, I think, IP65 rated, so it's actually got some good water resiliency in the device. That's pretty sweet. It doesn't have USB-C. It does have this proprietary charger. That's probably the stupidest part about this device, from what I've read from reviews. Most people tend to find this a pretty competent companion device, except that they have to have this proprietary cable to keep it charged. So maybe Seed Studio will release an updated one with USB-C, because you can have a USB-C that's IP65. No problem there, because no one really wants to carry around another cable. So that's probably one clear downside right off the bat. Now, I knew that going in, but this was a pretty affordable and relatively well-regarded device otherwise, so I went ahead with it. Seed Studio, getting started with the T1000 tracker. Blah, blah. Power on the device. Press 1 on the device. Press once to power on the device. There will be a rising melody, and the LED light will stay on for about 1 second. I'm not super sure where the button is at. Guess maybe this is the button. By golly, it did power on. If the device isn't charged when you press the button, charge it first. Do not use the fast charging charger. Okay. Connect via the app. iOS app, Android app. I do have the app. This is configured for Meshtastic. So I will go into the Meshtastic app. Maybe there's an available radio here. Let's try that. Enter the code. It says the default code is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Very original. Meshtastic 1 Charlie 58 would like to pair with your iPhone. Please enter the code. Shown on the device. Well, this device has no screen, so we'll have to take their word for it that it is. No, that didn't work. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pair. All right. Set your LoRa region. Acceptable. Region. Please set a region. I am in the United States. Use a preset. Presets long range fast, long range slow, long range moderate. Do not yet know what to do there, but the default is long fast. I think there are some concerns with long fast if you have a more congested network. I don't believe I have any network congestion risks here. We can always go back and change that later, but we'll start with that. Okay, let's see here. Ignore MQTT. I don't know what that means. Okay to MQTT. What is MQTT? Set my region. It's worth noting that even though there is a 1 watt effective radiated power limit for these LoRa devices, that almost none of them use 1 watt. Most of them are a fraction of a watt, 1/10 of a watt, something like that. I do see here on the app there is a 30 dBm transmit power. You can turn it down, which that's the max. We'll leave it on that for a moment. Number of hops, default of 3, and with Meshtastic you can go up to 7. With MeshCore you can go up to, I believe it's 64. Yeah, 64 hops with MeshCore. Frequency slot. Okay, that seems okay for now. Oh, it didn't take my setting for the region. Oh, I need to save. Fair enough. I shall save. Save config. Probably gotta, so it's gonna reboot, I assume, after I save the configuration. I hope. Ah. Very good. Booting back up. We are back. All right. Firmware 2.6.11. Subscribed. Subscribed to what? The network, I guess? Very good. That is something. All right. Let's see here. You can send and receive channel group chats and direct messages. From any message, you can long press to see available actions. Blah, 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 blah. Very good. Nodes. Find a node. Sure. That's my node. The Seed Card Tracker T1000E. Mesh map. Okay. Let's see what we've got. I live in Northwest Arkansas. In this area. I don't see anything. Test. Me. Let's see what happens. Max retransmission reached. Okay. Telemetry settings. Default metrics. I don't know, 1 hour. Environmental metrics. Power sensor options. One hour, sure. Range test. I will need to look up what MQTT is. I have no idea. Long name. Let's update it to K5 PO T1000E. Short name. K5 PO 1. Okay. It does say licensed operator. I think that changes it to a different sort of mode entirely. I'm not going to do that for now. Remote device T1000E has advertised your public key. This may indicate a nice little debug log here to check out. Test again. Recognize this may not be the most riveting thing to watch. So if you're still watching, thank you. All right, I do exist. I am on the map. However, at least as far as I know, or probably can be received with this, no one else is on the map. Well, that may be as far as we get today. I'm glad I got this far. I'm going to continue this conversation and continue this exploration. But for now, thank you. If you enjoyed this and want to join along and figure out more about this, as I do, please like and subscribe. I would sincerely appreciate it. I'll probably try to get this out of the house, maybe find somewhere I may be able to find another node and connect to it with a bit closer proximity and see if I can actually make a connection beyond just my companion device. So we shall see. If you have some questions or want to know more about this or have some guidance to give me because you already know more than I do, and you probably do, please drop it down in the comments. I would appreciate that as well. Until next time, my friends, 73, be well.